It is not a new task trying to hire a good salesperson. Even with the years that have passed since Meyer and Greenberg's um, what makes a good salesman article has come out, the characteristics of a good salesman still remain, which are the qualities that they possess and what hiring managers are still doing wrong, and why it's so crucial to hire the right person for this job. First, I'd like to start out with the qualities that a good salesman must possess. The first being empathy. Empathy is the ability to feel with a customer. That is what is able to drive the salesperson to relate to their customer. If someone has too much empathy, they may not be able to close their deal, which on the complete opposite end, if they don't have enough empathy, it may also cause them to not be able to close. The second characteristic is ego drive, which is the inner need for the salesperson to make the sale, which is completely aside from their materials that they're compensated with. A successful salesperson will have a strong ego drive, which balanced with empathy, they have this type of synergy, and each quality is equally important in driving the sale to completion. One cannot exist without the other. And these qualities don't typically change over time. While a salesperson may increase their abilities in each quality, they still have them, and that is what makes them successful, is that they have a nice balance of both. The second thing I'd like to talk about is how hiring managers are still doing it wrong. They're using tests to find outliers, and those tests usually are personality tests which have not been updated in probably the last 20 years to reflect the evidence that has been found by science and by experiments with sales. People have figured out how to take these tests, and often they bypass the system and say what they think the test administrator is looking for them to say. If they're good at sales, this would probably be very easy for them. The problem with these tests is that selling is a dynamic skill. Ability is not able to be gauged based on one personality trait, which is what these tests are measuring for. So that is really the biggest problem in these tests, is that hiring managers are using them specifically to weed out people who aren't passing these tests, which just because these tests may say one thing, it doesn't mean that someone doesn't have the skills that a salesman would need to be successful. And so the third thing I'd like to talk about is why it's so important to hire the right person from the start. The selling environment hasn't changed drastically in the last 20 years. While platforms to sell have, salesmen are still doing the same thing that they have been doing. In an experiment that Meyer and Greenberg did, they evaluated an office staff of a dealership, which had a sales team, an accounting team, and they found that a third of their staff was in the wrong position according to this test that they gave to all of the associates. And their top salesman at that dealership was actually located in the accounting department. So the need to move to hiring people based on their abilities rather than experience is something that our HR in certain places isn't doing. We need to not, moving these people would create not only efficiency but also proficiency in their respective areas. One of the examples that was mentioned in the article is that of Big Jim, who doesn't look the part of your typical professional salesman, has some jargon that he uses that is not typically considered professional, and likely without the test that had been submitted on his behalf, he wouldn't have been considered because of his background. The way that he looks is not typical, and he didn't have any sales experience prior. But as a result of the test that they had given him, he proved that he would be the most successful salesperson in that dealership and ultimately did become that person. He is the dealership's top salesman. So the question that we really need to move towards asking when hiring someone and making sure that we're hiring the right people is, does this man have the basic inner dynamics to sell successfully, which, as we mentioned before, are ego drive and empathy. And so to close, I would really like to highlight the important info that was covered, and that would be that a salesperson does have a strong ego drive and strong empathetic skills. They are absolute must-haves. Without it, a salesperson will not be successful. Another thing for a company to do would be to find and edit the mistakes of their hiring personnel. So we need to move instead away from this testing structure into finding people based on their abilities instead of their experience. And then also hiring the right person from the start, evaluating what someone is capable of at the very beginning, not based on their looks, not based on what they've done on the tests that they've been given, which is critical in increasing the sales activity for any given company. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.